Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. So today, this is our Polymath Student Seminar Series session, part 3. But there are no one signed up for giving a talk today. So instead, Professor Miller is going to give a talk about how to give talks. So please take it away.
So thank you. So you may think it's a little silly that I was turning it over to Thomas to turn it back over to me, but this is actually how you give talks. You should not be cheering the session when you're speaking. You should not be in charge of things when you're speaking. And so you might as well start things off on the right note. Sometimes things get a little bit informal in conferences, but the first part about giving a talk is who's actually running the session, what is the purpose of the talk. If you are running the session, it is your job to make sure that there's at least one question for the speaker at the end. It doesn't necessarily have to be a good question, although it's nice if that's the case, but it's nice for the speaker to feel like somebody actually was listening and cared a little bit about what they're saying. So, please feel free to speak up at any time today. The purpose of this is to just, share a little bit of some of the things I've learned over the years. My email, you should all have that through so many different sources, is over here, as well as my homepage. And then, over here is just, some links to some general advice I've given over the years, as well as some specific advice for giving talks or writing papers. And one of the things you might notice from what you're seeing over here is that this is not the highest level of slides right now. And again, this is because right now I'm just talking amongst ourselves, but if you wanted to do something professionally, you would do things a little bit better. Just one piece of advice is go to, this is my homepage, and go to the talks papers tabs and change .pdf to .tex to get source code. So one of the things that's great about tech is if you see how somebody does something, it's often not hard for you to copy it and do it yourself. And so everything I've written, everything that I have, if you go to my homepage, you can download the papers and the slides, and then you can just change the .pdf to .tex to get the source code. If you need the images, there are two things you can do to get the images. One, of course, is to ask me. But if there's an image in a talk, how could you get the image without asking me? Any thoughts?
Is there a recording?
I'm sorry?
Is there a recording?
Well, but let's say you want to use one of the images in one of my presentations in your own presentation, and you don't want to bother me because I'm getting emails. So you could try maybe right-clicking on the image or trying to click on the image, depending on how it's embedded, that may not work, but you could also do a screenshot. Is just take, it's amazing how many people don't realize that you can do screenshots. If you do a screenshot, you can just take a screenshot of the image. And so what I will do is I will toggle over now to, I'll stop the share and I will go to a PDF. So here is some slides on a game called Zombie Infection. And I like this because it illustrates a couple of good points about giving a talk. And so basically, if you share walls with 2 or more infected cells, you become infected. Once you're infected, you're always infected. So here, the red cells are the ones that are initially infected. The white cells are initially uninfected. And you want to see how are things propagating over time. And again, I love this problem. I have students this summer who are working on generalizations of this, but it's a great way to talk about giving good presentations. If you look at this slide, you notice that I have filled up almost the entire slide. I don't have a lot of white space. There's white space on the side, but I'm using so much of the room. I'm using different colors to try to highlight things. If I want to advance to, what happens one moment later, well, this cell and this cell, they both share walls with 2 infected, so they become infected. And so one moment later, this is where the infection will be. I can then ask, where will things be one moment after that? So who else shares 2 walls? This cell over here doesn't share, this doesn't share, this doesn't share, this doesn't share, but this does. And then all of a sudden you can see the size is rescaled, it's shrunk down, and continuing like this. And so, again, you want to use as much of the image as possible. in the old days, pre-pandemic response, talks were in person. And so you would be projecting it in a big room on a big screen. It would be fascinating to see what size devices everybody is using for this. Are some people doing this on a smartphone? Are some people doing it on a small iPad? Are some people projecting it on a big screen in a classroom? Depending on the size you have, it could be tough to see. If I want to capture these images, I can just draw, I don't know if you can see that, I just draw a little line around this. And then what I'm going to do is I will just go over to Mathematica, and hopefully you can see the Mathematica, and I'll just paste it in. And so now I've just taken the screenshot, pasted into Mathematica. I can right click on it and then just click, save image as. And you have many different ways that you can save it. So that if there is images that you want, it's actually not hard to grab and put them in your talk. Images are wonderful in terms of explaining what's going on. You should give credit to wherever you got the images from. Okay, when you're giving a talk, you want to decide how much animation do you want to do. Do you want to go from your main talk to a video clip? And there are some talks I have where I do have some small YouTube videos and I want to play a little bit of them. What is the danger of having a video clip? Anybody can think of any dangers of video clips?
Losing the attention of the listeners.
So one is possibly losing attention. Hopefully these are going to be outstanding, excellent, engaging videos that people are going to want to watch.
The clip doesn't play for whatever reason.
The clip doesn't play for whatever reason. And so if you have something that doesn't play, maybe you don't have a good connection to the internet. And so because of that, there could be some issue. And so, for instance, right now, I'm going to quickly toggle to a YouTube video. I'll turn off the sound. And so I've made a better video of this later, but just, this is looking at Pascal's triangle mod 2 and looking at what's going on. And so it turns out if you look at Pascal's triangle mod 2, you actually see a fractal pattern emerge. And so here it is, zooming out. Now, I can actually run this on Mathematica, so it's not that bad. I don't need this on YouTube. It's not nearly as exciting. So I do have a backup for something like this. But there is always the danger of what happens if there's not a net connection where I am. And amazingly, that does happen. So you need to always have backup plans. Depending on the level of the animation, you can sometimes simulate it without too much trouble. And so, for instance, for the zombie infection talk, we said if you share 2 walls with somebody who's infected, you're infected for all eternity. So here we notice that the virus died out. Well, okay, it didn't die out, but no one else got infected. The virus stabilized in this upper right corner, and these cells over here were infected. So the question is there any way to choose 3 out of these 16 cells and have everybody infected? What's the maximum area I could get infected with 3 cells? What's the minimum number of cells I need infected to get everybody infected if I position them properly? Can anybody give me an easy configuration that guarantees that everybody will be infected? So can somebody give me an easy configuration that guarantees everybody will be infected at some point? The easiest one you can think of.
Is the number of initial infected cells limited, or?
So let's say we initially have some square. I think this is an 8x8. So give me an initial state of who's infected that ensures that eventually everybody's infected. Simplest thing you can think of.
Everybody's infected to begin with?
Beautiful. And so you can see this is either a planted question or a very observant student. Infect everybody. And so when you're giving talks, try to come up with easy cases that you can go over first to try to explain what's going on. And then let's talk about how expensive this is. If I have an n by n grid, this costs me n squared. Can anybody do a little bit better than this rather than infecting everybody? What would be a little bit better? Any thoughts?
Just infection on the borders?
So just like the outside perimeter?
Yeah.
So if you do the outside perimeter, that will propagate inward. Excellent. So there's actually something. Now, what's nice about your answer is that's going to grow roughly proportional with n, right?
Right.
And so you go from a quadratic cost to a linear cost. Sometimes people say, take every infected cell and then let one of them be non-infected. And then that's a little bit of a savings. Or a little bit better is a checkerboard pattern. And then that's a 50% savings. Your border is even better, but there's something that's even better than just doing the border. So the border is roughly 4 times n. What would be better than just the border? Any thoughts?
There was a chat message that said on a diagonal.
On the diagonal. And so instead of doing this as a video, I just did this as a bunch of images and just hitting them one after the other. And you can see, the virus propagating. And so again, it's not as much of a deal now as when I was younger, but there's always concerns about the technology going. This is now just one slide, and I just have a bunch of images, and I'm just choosing, I'm using the /only command in tech. I'm just choosing which image is being displayed. And so all of the squares are the same size. I'm just using Microsoft Paint to just fill in different squares and have it propagate. And this is a nice way to show a simulation like this. I've done similar things like this for virus propagations and graphs and whatnot by just having a bunch of slides like this, similar for eigenvalues. So when you're giving a talk, there's so many different ways to present information. As visual as you can is terrific. The more visual stuff you have, the better. The more equations you have, the harder it's going to be for people to process. And so sometimes if you have long equations, involved equations, it's actually nice to put things in different colors. And so what I will do is I'm going to just share a slide with something that I did with my kids. And so I don't want to go through the whole talk. Well, maybe I do. I like the talk. It's a fun talk involving Darth Vader. And so we have a certain probability, 5/6 to the n plus 5/6 to the n minus 25/6 to the n. And I've put them in different colors. And the different colors have different explanations, so you can tell where things are coming from. And so if you have a very long equation and you want to start talking about different parts of it, highlight different parts of it in different color. I'm going to talk about this part, and this part now becomes red. And we discuss it. And now I want to talk about another part. You could make that red part black, or you could keep it red and now highlight another part in black. Anything you can do to keep people's focus is great. This slide I actually don't love because there's a lot of text on it. It's coming from things going slowly and adding things a little bit, but there's a lot of text. The more text you have, the harder it is for people to follow what you're doing. In a real talk in a classroom, you have the advantage of a blackboard. Does anybody know what the greatest advantage of a blackboard is? So what's so great about a blackboard?
People can follow through the equations and all other stuff, maybe.
Okay, good. So why can they follow the equations on a blackboard, but they can't do it from an overhead projection?
I don't know, maybe because it takes a little bit more time than slides.
So good. So when you're writing things down, it takes more time to do it if you're writing it down. When you have slides, there's a tendency to go warp speed through things. And so here I have an external device. I will actually hit stop for a moment. And so hopefully you'll be able to see this. I will hold this up. I'm going to try to pin myself. Okay, there we go. And so you might be able to see some kind of like infinite loop of pictures of pictures of pictures of pictures. So this is actually a pretty good sized screen. This is actually a large iPad next to it to just give some sense of relative size. Okay, there we go. This gives a little bit of a sense. And so I spent the money to get a really large screen that I can write on, clearly. And so now I've just opened up, for instance, Microsoft front page. Microsoft PowerPoint. And so I can now just toggle, I can go here, and I can start writing equations. And so let's do some math. And again, I have a pen, so I'm not using my finger. I actually have more control. I can hopefully write a little bit neater. For me, that's actually considered neat. You know, if I tried really hard, I can probably write a little bit better. Is there a significant difference in reading between the first and the second? Or is the first chicken scratch close enough that people can follow it? You know, it's something that you need to just be a little bit aware of as you are going. I'm trying to see what people said in the chat, if this is readable or not. Okay, so the biggest advantage of a Blackboard is the material is up for a while. That is a huge advantage. When you are doing things by slides, you are moving quickly from slide to slide to slide to slide. If you've defined something 3 slides ago, unless you put it on a later slide, you are trusting that people will remember it. If you are doing a talk in analytic number theory and you have the Riemann zeta function, most people in the audience will know what the Riemann zeta function is. It is still your good form to define it at least once, you know, for a real part of S, you know, greater than 1, you know, to define it once, and you actually put a colon before the equal sign to mean you're defining it. But this is something that you can trust people will remember. The more complicated definitions you have, the harder it's going to be. I had a student who was doing a thesis with me on virus propagation in graphs, and there were a lot of parameters. If you've been working on the project for about a year, you know these parameters by heart, you know what they are, you know what they do, you know their connection. If this is the first time you're seeing them, it's very hard to remember. And so I told him, I want you to repeat these parameters on each slide and just remind the audience what they are. So again, in a Blackboard talk, you can have 6 Blackboards sometimes in a classroom that are visible all at the same time. You can have definitions up there, you can have key lemmas and whatnot, and it's much, much easier to do. Okay, so this is, you know, just some general stuff. You know, you want to write legibly. One of the nice things about giving a talk like this is you can actually save your slides when you're done. So all I have to do now is go to File and, you know, click, you know, Save As, and you can now post them. It's not as professional as preparing the slides beforehand, but if you want to slow yourself down, if you want to have some involvement from the audience, you know, it's absolutely fine. You know, general advice when you're giving a talk is know your audience. You should always prepare more material than you're going to present, and you adjust accordingly based on, am I running short on time? You might adjust based on who is in the audience. I remember years ago, I was going to a special session and I noticed, oh, there's 3 or 4 professors and everybody else is a graduate student. Okay, you know, today I'm going to give a little bit more of a background talk and just, you know, explain a little bit more. There are some schools, Michigan is one of them, some of the schools in the New York City area do this, where they actually break visiting talks up into 2 parts. The first 45 minutes is often just a general overview of the subject. You then have cookies and tea, and then most people escape and head for the hills. And then maybe 2 or 3 people stay, and these are the people who want to know the real technical details. So how did you, you know, save that fact of logarithm? And it's a more informal setting for people who really care. It's an interesting question as to how much detail do you want to get into? If you are seeing something for the first time, it's a lot to follow all the algebra. And so what you often want to do is you want to speak at a high level and you want to just say, here's the key idea. If you're speaking to experts, often giving the key idea is more than enough. Another big thing is, when do you come to the key point of the talk? So for instance, when should somebody know what are you speaking about? As early as possible. Sometimes it takes a while because you have to define terms. And until you define the terms, you can't really state what your main result is, but you can at least say, well, it's in the following field. I'm looking at the following. Okay, so you know, I've babbled a little bit for about 20 minutes now, so I want to just, you know, take a break for a moment and see if anybody has any questions.
I have a question actually. So this is
Yeah.
related to what you've been just talking about, but can you sort of, yeah, I guess can you sort of talk about some factors that lead to your decision of like what to include in general, and when you're talking about a talk, and how much to,
Great
like
question.
you were talking about, you want to be as high level as possible, and depending on the audience, you're going to go into a little bit less detail or whatnot. But
Right. So great question. A lot of times your talks will have technical appendices at the end, so that if somebody really wants to see the detail, you've got the slides ready to go. Most of the time, especially if it's a 20-minute talk, 20 minutes is just enough time for you to think that you can go into detail, but you really don't have enough time to go into too much detail. And so a lot of it is, setting yourself up to talk to somebody afterwards, over coffee, in the hallways, through email, to just give them a sense of what you're doing, or to maybe interest them to look at your paper. So if you have a paper, ideally you post it on the archive, ideally you have it on your homepage so that people can go there and see all the technical details. A lot of it, and this is much harder to do by Zoom, is looking at the audience reactions. It's like, oh, if you see people basically falling asleep, reading other things, that's not a good sign. You want to try to keep people engaged and excited. If you see people at the edge of their seats, and every now and then there's a talk like that. Sometimes it doesn't happen often. When somebody's announcing a big result, sometimes people in the audience, wait a minute, are you about to? Just, that doesn't happen often, but sometimes the real experts see where something is going and someone is trying to keep it a secret. Most of our talks are not going to be like that. You're going to clearly state what it is, and you want to explain the key ideas. And what you have to remember is a lot of the people in the audience are going to be expert mathematicians. So even if they haven't seen exactly what you're doing, they've seen other things and they can pick things up pretty quickly. And often just giving them a little bit of a hint, a little bit of a heads up of what's going on is enough for them to figure out the rest. They don't need to see all the algebra, they can kind of see how it's going. But keep your eye on the clock. When you are young and you haven't given a talk many times, you want to practice. You want to practice so that you have the timing down. You want to know, okay, if I am at 15 minutes and I'm only here, I am running too slow. I'm not going to get to my main theorem and there's no way to recover. I should have recovered earlier when at 10 minutes I saw I was behind schedule. So you have to really be watching the time and add or subtract things, live. One of the hardest things to do is to be humorous, to be funny. Some people plan jokes. There are some jokes that are very easy to incorporate, and sometimes it's just a question of just being comfortable delivering them. Other people are extremely nervous when they give talks. The first couple of times I gave talks, I was extremely nervous and I had way too much technical information on my slides. The advantage is, well, if I forget what I'm doing, I just have to look at the slides and read it. So the less information you have on slides, the better. Use the pause key. So you only show some of the slides, and then as you show the slides, you then advance to the next one. By using pause properly, the advantage of that is you can control what people are looking at. And if you control what people are looking at, there's a much better chance that they're going to follow you. If possible, try to use images to illuminate things. So I will do another share screen. So this is one of my favorite images. It's from one of my thesis students a few years ago on a game involving the Fibonacci numbers. The actual details don't matter. We're trying to prove that player 2 has a winning strategy. We're going to assume that player 1 has a winning strategy. So we'll color a box pink if player 1 has a winning strategy from that position with whoever's going next, and blue if player 2. I'm not going to go through all the details, but you can imagine as I'm talking about this, how things are highlighting up and making the argument easy for, oh, now we've got something that's blue. And then that blue continues down, then it starts propagating up and starts propagating up. And the idea is to try to make it easy for somebody to follow what you're doing. Use color, have the slides, filling up the space. Interact with the audience. If possible, try to keep them engaged. It's possible to write things down as well. One of the things that I love about writing is it slows you down and you can't go nearly as fast. And you can try to do things in color to try to highlight what's going on. So any other general questions right now? So the final thing is, where to give your talk. So when you are young, it's your advisors who will be on the lookout for, this is a good conference to go to. There are a lot of undergraduate conferences. You should have gotten an email about YMC, the Young Mathematicians Conference. There's also the Joint Math Meetings in Seattle. These are natural places to go and give a talk. Then there's also research conferences, and those are a little bit harder to get into. It's going to be really interesting right now as conferences start to slowly move to being in person again. I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand. There is going to be a number theory conference in person at Union College in the Albany area in October. And I've talked to some of the organizers, and there's just so many people who want to go there and give a talk. So your advisors should be on the lookout of good places for you to go. When you go to a conference, what is your job when you go to a conference? Your job is to what?
Talk to people.
Talk to people. So my good friend, Eduardo Duenas, and I'll make sure I'm mentioning his name, disagrees with this story, but I insist it happened. We were at a conference when we were both in graduate school, and our advisor saw us having lunch, just the two of us. I was eating peanut butter and jelly, and he was eating Spam from a can. And our advisor yelled at us and said, the point of going to a conference is not to save money and have a lunch by yourself. You already know each other. You should be talking to people you don't know. You should be meeting people you don't know. Don't let me ever see you doing this again. You give me your expenses. I will cover your lunch. I don't want to see this. He insists he was not having Spam. He was having Spam. He's not here to defend himself, so that's his choice. But it is an opportunity to get to know people. When you are young, it is intimidating. The very first conference I went to was a section on computational number theory, and two of the giants in the subject, Dennis Hedgel and Andrew Odlyzko, were the organizers. And I was absolutely terrified of presenting my results in front of them. But most of the time, people are kind, especially to junior colleagues. They're trying to encourage. And I got to know them. And in fact, Dennis and I would go jogging for years whenever we ran into each other at conferences. And if you can start talking to people in different settings, it makes a world of difference. And so don't go to a conference to just give your talk and be by yourself. You go to a conference to interact with people. If possible, you try to leave a conference with one new research problem or one new research collaborator. Worst case, you leave with at least new people being aware of what work you're doing, of who you are. So that, oh, so-and-so does work in X. This could be useful for, maybe they'll invite you to their school. Maybe they might want to collaborate with you in the future if they discover they're doing something and they're stuck on it and, oh wait, I heard a talk on this. Or if they're doing somewhat similar work, they might try to refer to some of your papers. John Conway, who sadly died this past year, one of the greatest lecturers I've ever seen. He could make a 45 mini-series lecture on belly lint lead to deep mathematics. It was amazing what this man could do. I'm going to say one of my favorite problems of his: if you know the answer already, you are not allowed to speak. If you haven't seen this before, it's fair game. I'm going to give you terms in a sequence, and I want you to give me the next term. All right, so this is the first term. I assume at this point that there's not enough information for you to figure out what the next term of the sequence is. Too many things can start like this. So here's the next term. Does anybody know the sequence? I think I'm doing it properly. Has anybody seen the sequence before?
Yeah, seen it before.
Am I doing it correctly? Have I made a mistake?
I think it's right.
Okay. So can somebody who's never seen this before, can you read the first line out loud for me?
1, 1.
1, 1. Okay, thank you. Can somebody read the second line?
2, 1.
2, 1. Next line.
1, 2, 1, 1.
If you haven't seen this before, do you have any idea now? I see a smile from Thomas.
Yeah, it's look and say sequence.
Yeah, it's the look or the see and say sequence. Each line is just the previous read out loud. So if you want an example of a non-trivial sequence, this is a wonderful example. There is so much great mathematics in this sequence. I strongly urge you to go online and look this up. You know, Conway was just an absolute master at finding great math in the most unlikely places. And so this is another interesting part of a talk, is you want to motivate your talk. So, you know, this starts off looking like a silly problem, but the behavior of the sequence turns out to involve the largest eigenvalue of a 92 by 92 matrix, which is Jordanizable but not diagonalizable. So there's some really interesting linear algebra that emerges in problems like this. So whenever you're giving a talk, you want to try to motivate it, you want to try to connect it. What's one way to motivate or connect it? Connect it to something earlier in the day, right? If you're in a session on blah and you're the 5th speaker, hopefully one of the first 4 speakers said something that's vaguely related to something that you are doing. And it's wonderful if you can actually mention that and, you know, tell people, oh, you know, in so-and-so's talk earlier today, we heard about yada, 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 you know, along those lines, I wanted to just mention. So I brought up Conway because when I was at MathFest years ago and giving a talk, I actually did this and I adjusted my talk based on somebody who was speaking earlier in the day. When Conway was speaking at an undergraduate math conference at Brown, he actually adjusted his talk to pull in the work of some undergraduates earlier in the day. And the undergraduates were just so thrilled that Conway was mentioning their results in his talk. And so the talk I gave at MathFest, somebody had made a Futurama reference. And so I very quickly added a quick slide, you know, between some of my slides on zeros and ones by, you know, putting in something from Futurama and referring to what they were doing. It's a little bit harder if you have slides than if you're just doing things live, but, you know, there was, you know, 20 minutes between, you know, when they were speaking and when I was speaking. That was more than enough time to download an image, shove it in, recompile, upload again, and be ready to go. If you can talk about other people's work in your work, that's nice. It makes them feel, oh, good, so somebody actually was listening to what I'm doing. It's a good thing to do. Hopefully they will do this with, you know, your talk as well. We probably have time for maybe one more question if anybody has anything. All right, so the last thing I will do is just, you know, just some general advice about giving a talk. This is on my webpage as well. Is it okay for you to have a glass of water to drink from? Yes. If you're giving a talk by Zoom, you can actually have notes to yourself out of range of the camera. When people are doing job interviews by Zoom or Skype or whatever, you can have notes to yourself outside the range of the camera. That's fine. If somebody asks you a hard question, do you have to answer immediately? No, that's a really good question. Give me one moment to. Now, sometimes people will ask you questions that are not appropriate, that are unrelated. And it sometimes can get a little awkward in terms of how to deal with something like that. When I was in another country a couple of years ago visiting, there was somebody else who was visiting, and they went to my talk and they asked questions that were really not related to what I was doing. They were more related to what they were doing. And, interesting or not, but that's fine, but that's not the purpose of my talk. And I was polite. And then, I moved on to the next school that I was visiting because it's expensive to go to another country. So you try to hit several at once. He was doing a similar route and he was there, came to the talk again and started asking the same questions, and so I said, those are really great questions. Unfortunately, I don't have time to get into that right now. I'd love to talk to you further after my talk. And he had no desire to talk to me afterwards. He wanted to just hijack the talk and speak about what he wanted. So you sometimes just have to figure out how do you want to deal with things. Try not to show disgust, at people. Sometimes it can be hard. I was at a conference in Europe with 3 of my students, and 2 of them were presenting with me at one moment. And after we were done presenting, we had questions. The first was a technical question. Students answered it beautifully. The second was to me, and it was like, I don't understand. How will your students learn how to be mathematicians if they only work in groups? And so, I don't want, I'm going like this in my mind, but I don't want to look like that. And so, you just put on a polite face. Some of my students know I have a little move where I put my hand in my pocket and I squeeze my keys so it causes pain. So, I have the keys, digging into my skin so that I don't burst out laughing or whatnot. You don't want to say, what a stupid question, or, not everyone's an asshole like you that people don't want to work with. Most of us are actually nice, and you answer politely as much as you can, and you can say, I can absolutely see that concern. What we have found over the years is that it's actually very beneficial because different people have different backgrounds, they have different perspectives, they ask questions which then inspires someone else, and we find that it's a very wonderful symbiotic you can have nice things. You want to just make sure you don't yell at anybody. There have been people who have lost their tempers. It doesn't happen often. It can sometimes be amusing as a young graduate student or a postdoc to see professors getting into fights. Doesn't happen often in mathematics, which I think is a good thing. But again, don't ever be afraid to just say, that's a great question, and just try to collect your thoughts. The other thing is, there are certain questions you should expect. I will end with a example. So this is another inspired by John Conway. So John Conway is responsible for many things. One of the things that a lot of people love of him is the surreal numbers. How many people have heard of the surreal numbers? Okay, so I see at least one hand is up about surreal numbers. So I have just quickly gone to Wikipedia, fountain of all knowledge, source of all wisdom. And so, I'll put the link over here to the surreal numbers. So imagine you are giving a talk on the surreal numbers. What do you think is a reasonable question you might expect to get on the surreal numbers? So the definition from Wikipedia gives you a lot of information already. But imagine I didn't give you that. Imagine, you just know This talk is on surreal numbers. What might you wonder about the surreal numbers?
Why should we care about surreal
So
numbers?
one is, why should we care about them? And so hopefully your talk will address why we care about them. What else might you wonder about the surreal numbers? Which of the surreal numbers seem similar to, just by the name? Have you heard of anything that sounds similar to surreal numbers?
Imaginary.
No,
The real.
Real.
the reals, right? Surreal seems very similar to reals, right? What might you wonder about surreals versus reals?
What makes them different from the reels?
What makes them different? So that would be an extremely natural question to ask is, hey, can you give me an example of a number that is a surreal number, but is not a real number? Are the two sets different? You know, that should be a question that you just, either you address it in your talk, or you have to expect someone is going to ask a question like that. So there's emails about how do you ask questions in a talk. So one thing is, can you give me an example? That's a great thing to ask. And if the talk is good, they'll give you a motivating example that you can think of. Here is your prototypical surreal number. Another great thing you can do is, normally theorems have conditions. I very rarely see a theorem that's completely unconditional. Remove a condition. Is the result still true? Or ask about generalizing it. So I see you proved this in 2 dimensions. Does your result extend to higher dimensions? And if so, what are the technicalities? What are the difficulties in extending? So you want to have a couple of natural questions to ask. And again, it's not that bad to just come up with a good question for almost any talk. Look at the conditions and theorems and ask about removing them. Ask about what were the technical difficulties. Ask about applications. Ask about examples. If there's any computation, ask about how difficult is it to compute. How long do the computations take to do? Is there numerical accuracy issues? All right, so we've got about 1 minute left until it's 10:45. Any last questions?
I was wondering, like, how do you know when registering for a talk, if it, like in an REU setting or like in Polymath, if your results are in some sense enough for like a conference talk?
So who should you ask if your results are enough?
Your mentors,
Your mentors, right?
yeah.
Do not avoid your mentors, okay? Your mentors are the ones who should know whether or not your result is good enough. They should know what journal to send it to. As you get older, eventually the hat goes on you and you become the mentor. But by then you've had years of training and experience. And so one of the things I don't like is sometimes in undergraduate conferences, the YMC, it's a general audience, so you have to be very careful in terms of how you write things up and how much of your space you have to devote to explaining things and how much time you have to do selling the results. If you're speaking to experts, they know how good the result is. But if it's a general REU conference, they may not know. One of my favorite movie descriptions is a spruced up version of a movie that I think many of you have seen. I will say the description, and I'm curious to see if anybody can guess what movie. Okay, you ready? A young girl travels to a strange psychedelic landscape and kills the first person she meets, then teams up with 3 complete strangers to kill again. Anybody have a guess of what movie?
The Wizard of Oz.
It's The Wizard of Oz. A young girl travels to a strange psychedelic landscape and kills the first person she sees, and then teams up with 3 complete strangers to kill again. It is a description of The Wizard of Oz. It's probably not how you would normally describe it. And so I will end with that, to always remember who your audience is. If you're giving an undergraduate math club talk on your work, that's very different than giving a talk to world experts. If it's an undergraduate math club talk, spend more time on the background, spend more time maybe on why we might care about this. Don't worry so much about all the technical details. If you're speaking to the world experts, they know the background, they know why we care. You know, I took classes with Andrew Wiles of Fermat's last theorem when I was at Princeton. He really didn't have to explain to people why we care about elliptic curves and modular forms if they're in his class. You know, you've got that as a prerequisite walking in. All right, if anybody has any questions, I'm always happy to chat.